a while.
It's been too long, Esther.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had something that you shared that I thought was super interesting, and we're like, let's talk about it because I think
I-
there's something bigger at play.
And as two people who are really passionate about the art of marketing, it was just fascinating when I read about what Peloton's trying to do. Obviously, it's a company like many others who have really worked hard to try to come back from where they were maybe at the highs of the pandemic, and they're going on a journey like a lot of other companies are. One of the things they're trying to do is to say, hey, we see a trend. Gen Z is looking at strength training that might not be their core competency in terms of endurance and exercise bicycling. What do we have to do to address that market? As you know, as people who've been in marketing orgs, you and I would know that if a strategy or if an executive comes to us and say, hey, we want to be known for this adjacent but different thing, what would that mean for a marketer? And I just think that those implications and running that through is just really a fun sort of thought exercise.
Well, like what we were kind of going back and forth on before, we jumped on this call is like this is kind of signaling a really interesting time, which is what I like to think is like a power shift. I
Yeah,
mean, you have Peloton who literally they were all about bicycles.
right.
And now they're like, hey, this is a big enough change in preference and in demand where they're shifting their priorities to strength training. And you look at what happened at the Olympics. I mean, you had all these athletes, especially like young women, posting about different types of bodies, and they're really celebrating these different styles of working out and fitness. And I think that Gen Z has really opened the door for authenticity. And then you have these shifting preferences and the brands that really listen to these preference shifts, I think are the ones that are going to survive. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you remember, like, I personally remember like 15 years ago when the shift from Gen X to millennials were taking place, right? We were like fighting print advertising and it's like, hey, let's do social. It's like, imagine looking back now, it's like, imagine if you hadn't adapted.
Well, yeah, no, absolutely. And how do you stay relevant to a new market or a new area of focus? And at the same time, you don't want to alienate your core customers. There's probably a sizable chunk of boomers, Gen X, millennials who kind of grew up in that era where maybe cycling was much more of endurance cycling was the aspiration. And I know where Peloton's roots are trying to take that experience of like the Tour de France, just being in an endurance cycling and going into a totally new market, but yet staying relevant. This is something that a lot of companies really struggle with because if you just have no idea what you're doing or you do the wrong things, you'll just look kind of like inauthentic or just old and miss the market.
Like out
So
of
it's really
touch.
important. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I find it interesting that like even in my space of cloud communications, you were in cloud communications for quite some time there too. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm seeing more of a demand for omni-channel customer experiences, and I firmly believe, and I actually know because just talking to customers, that like these different preferences for different modes of communications, also mobile first experiences, they are totally driven by the younger generation wanting to connect via social digital channels. They don't want to jump on a video call all the time. They want to be able to, make a phone call real quick or send a text or send a chat. And you really see them not only starting to impact workforce and working styles, but also now the market, literally. Like, I think just a couple years ago during the pandemic, they weren't really taken seriously as someone who you can extract a lot of economic value from, but it's 2024 now and it's a completely different landscape.
It's totally different. And I think the way you would approach things has also changed. If this were to happen, if Peloton were to have this insight to make this pivot, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even, they would be saying, okay, we want Chris Hemsworth, we want Arnold Schwarzenegger, and we're just gonna have these marquee brand ambassadors who are going to be our champion on TV ads for appointment television, and that's how a big brand would get their their awareness out into the marketplace, and then smaller brands would look at maybe trade publications or more niche channels, but certainly with an emphasis on print, on TV, early, mobile advertising. Now it's omni-channel, but the nature of the influencers maybe you want to target would be different. You want authenticity. I mean, I think you talked about that. I think it would be much more to have just someone who's in the moment, maybe not even famous, who's gone through a program and had some results, and has a captivating way to present that, and then have an interactive uh, um, way for people to feel like they're joining a movement or something, and have much more of an emotional connection as opposed to just seeing an aspirational image and then reacting to that.
I completely agree. That's kind of like the 1960s Don Draper era. And in
Right.
some way, we're kind of going back to old school marketing, but with a what is it, a modern twist. For example, like B2C has really tapped into not just this idea of celebrities, but influencers and even micro influencers. And I
Right.
think B2B has lagged behind. But this year, I'm really starting to see the rise of B2B micro influencers. And a lot of them are young faces. They're folks that are bringing a really awesome twist to how businesses are talking to other businesses. You would hear things like, digital transformation. And now people are saying things like, you could do cool stuff here. Like you could take notes
Right.
on your phone. And it's so much
Yeah.
more authentic and it's refreshing. And I see it just permeating everywhere. I mean, just look at your LinkedIn feed nowadays.
No, yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that if I look at, talking about your LinkedIn feed, the people who are surfacing, the people who the algorithm is favoring aren't necessarily, some huge name who's posting something. I don't know, like a Mark Cuban or a Ariana Huffington, or someone maybe in the early days of LinkedIn that really moved the table. And nowadays it could just be someone who's had some kind of a post that really resonated with people. People are latching on to something that's very true, very personal, very real, and they're sort of eschewing some things that they know and recognize or not. So I think that's very important.
Yeah, one of my favorite podcasts I'm listening to right now is called Marketing Against the Grain, and it's from the CMO. I think his name is Kip Wagner and Kieran Flanagan. They're both leaders at HubSpot's marketing team,
Okay,
and
great.
they're talking about how there's the rise of personality-led marketing. So it's kind of that evolution of influencer marketing, but also having your own unique voice and a
Right.
unique and distinct personality that is essentially a personal brand that you're attaching to a corporate brand. And so all of that is that like evolution of like the TikTok era B2Bified, if that makes any sense.
No, absolutely. And I think where that's hitting corporate strategy is, what is the brand that you want to present? In Peloton's case, what are they going to go to market with? They've made incredible investments in their brand, and it means a great deal to people who are into cycling but don't want to get out into the wild and in uncertain conditions, and want to have a regular, dependable, programmatic approach to endurance fitness. That's a core group of people that they've built a brand around. Yet for Gen Z, that investment in the brand is irrelevant. If they launched a different brand out of whole cloth, it may actually be beneficial to them. So I think how you approach the market even is really important. I know a lot of companies are going to have a hard time there, because holding on to that legacy brand is really, really something that institutionally you're organized around. You have a branding team, you have a lot of people who want to defend that. And I know with Microsoft, for example, they've struggled with that. And how do they approach being a cloud? How does the Windows brand um, work in a cloud environment? What does that mean? And that's been something, by and large, they've kind of moved away from in a lot of ways, as they've become an enterprise cloud company. So they, in a certain sense, sort of led the way, kind of jettisoning some of these hard truths that people clung to that maybe aren't so true anymore.
If you're stuck to your old ways, fundamentally you're going to start to fall behind because
Right.
the way people engage with your brand, the way people are looking for you is changing, and it's,
Oh,
obviously Gen Z is a big part of it, but cloud adoption is a lot more prevalent than it was 5 years ago. And you have Gen AI not creeping through, literally proliferating across all aspects of our lives at this point. And so it's really a moment of, I don't want to call it an existential crisis, but kind of like, who are you? How are you gonna adapt to this new world? And if you're not planning that, I mean, I would be really, really concerned about what the next 2-3 years looks like, for you as a company. I was listening to another podcast and they were saying how like virality is normal, meaning
mm,
you never know what can go viral. It's not just like these one-off things, but the reality is there will be something that is viral at any given moment, right? And one of the things that was mentioned was Swedish candy. So Swedish candy, apparently, like somebody posted a TikTok, it blew up because they were talking about, oh, this is just amazing quality, and they don't make candy like this in the rest of the world. And it got millions and millions of views, and now their supply chain is completely out of whack. Like
oh,
I think it was the bonbons, the company that makes bonbons. They're Swedish
okay.
apparently.
Yeah.
And
Whoa.
there's like a 15x increase in demand now. And so it's just kind of like these are the examples of what I mean by, like, you never know what's going to create virality. Like, how you go to market is fundamentally different. Demand gen spends becoming less efficient, organic content weighing way more heavily, and you just never know how that's going to impact how people purchase and find your product. But I just thought that was such a interesting example of the power of the way Gen Z connects with brands and what they can do for your company. And that's a
Yeah.
B2C example, but it's the same way. And I mean, in B2B, we're just a couple years behind. So, what I like to say is B2B has a crystal ball typically. You look at
Well,
what's
you're
happening on the
absolutely
consumer
right.
side.
No,
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. And this is something that is, I think people really, they see it in the B2C world, but they're oblivious to it sometimes in the B2B world. And I think what your point is, there are a lot of gatekeepers on food. Procter and Gamble spends probably a ton of money to try to be the snack provider of choice. I think PepsiCo has a number of offerings in that world. And yet, for some unheard of company that doesn't have even 100th or 1,000th of the muscle of these two organizations, is able to kind of break through in a virality. It levels the playing field in a lot of ways that are going to make some entrenched companies very nervous. It should certainly, because they're focused on supply chain, logistics, relationship, distribution, and they're focused on an entire sort of schedule where marketing is interfacing with their operations that is completely disrupted by a new entrant. And that's obviously a B2C example, but you see the same with B2B. And I would say, for example, people just listening today, how many people do you know work with a Macintosh, an Apple Mac computer? That was something that was unheard of, even 10 years ago. So no one would have had that. Everyone would have had an HP, a Dell, and it would have been running Windows. Now you don't see that anymore. How many people, their primary device is a tablet versus a laptop? You're seeing incredible switches in how things are going. And that is a B2B motion. I'm talking about enterprise, not consumer use of a IT asset. So it's really remarkable how we're seeing switches there.
That's such a great example because and then that's a long game strategy. I remember when I was in elementary school and we used to have those big Apple Macintoshes. Man, those guys planted the seeds early. They were like,
Early.
"Oh, this person knows how to type. We're gonna get an Apple Macintosh in front of it." And they made
That's
them
right.
all cute, like they were all colorful back
Right.
then with the
Yeah.
little bubbles. And
Yeah.
look at us now, right? You're
Right.
right. We've transitioned to, like, consumer preferences essentially drive B2B preferences. There's just a little bit of a lag.
Right. No, absolutely. But you can quickly be disintermediated, and I take that because how many? Just for example, if you're thinking about someone listening today, your enterprise productivity suite, you standardize around the Microsoft platform, the Google platform, but all of a sudden someone says, you know what, let's just spin up a Miro board or something like that, and all of a sudden this is a enterprise application, and it's you know let's just say going against the grain in terms of other entrenched providers. And certainly it's something that I know our employers would or are focused on very much to try to make sure that they're looking at those trends and not missing those moments.
When I look at the decision business leaders have to make in the near future, to your point, it's, there's different types of B2Bs. Like some B2Bs are functional specific, persona specific, or business line specific. I think solutions like ServiceNow and RingCentral were a little bit more horizontal and infrastructure oriented. And so as business leaders kind of look at what's happening right now with this generational power shift, or just Gen Z kind of influencing workforce behaviors a little bit more, I think it's about how are you going to appeal and retain your existing base and the existing influencers and buyers you already have relationship with, but also embrace and connect in a new and different way with the younger generation. Because not only do you have to continue to keep those relationships with the business decision makers, but like a bottoms up strategy of winning the end users who are eventually going to be decision makers. I mean, if you're not playing that game, question, the stability of your company over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. Coming from, I've obviously specialized in the public sector, right? And I know that these same considerations are out there. You might not think that public sector is thinking about a competitive landscape or losing, a customer space or segment. But the reality is they have to, in the sense that they need to project competency, they need to project transparency, they need to project all of these things to a marketplace. And that's really in many ways the same as a B2B marketing effort, right? This is a communication to a group of citizens or a group of residents or a group of visitors or a group of people from somewhere else who happen to find themselves. So there's a lot of effort that has to go in there and a lot of thought in terms of how are you going to reach, how are you going to engage with, how are you going to build a relationship with, build trust with, build rapport with a constituency, and really do that in a remarkable way. So that's obviously the public sector is looking at it like that. But every other sector, this isn't just a story of small IT startups trying to do a B2B play. This is something that is cross-industry, cross-segment, large companies, small companies, for sure.
Yeah, and then in public sector, we're seeing on the education side as well, there's a demand to meet different multi-generational preferences. Students nowadays are asking about admissions information through Twitter or X and Instagram. And if you're not there, and if you don't have the systems in place, your engagement is going to probably not be where it should be. But
absolutely,
no, this has been really cool. I feel like we're kind of culturally all around it right now. And I mean, look at what Kamala Harris is doing. I mean, this is not a political podcast by any means, but like appreciating, I mean, the fact that I think she has like 4 to 5 social media managers. Apparently they're all like 24 years old. I mean, that's insane to me. You have 24-year-olds kind of managing the Instagram account, social accounts of a presidential candidate. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling. It just shows you the gravitas of the influence and their style has on everybody.
No, absolutely. And whether people are listening and they want to go out and they vote for her or vote for President Trump or for some other party, that the thing to note is that Vice President Harris has had to create a campaign out of nothing with no essentially institutional organization around it, and do that on a moment's notice. The power of the tools that we have, of the reach that we have, of the social networks that we have, if you take advantage of it, you can start a campaign with 2 months to go in an election and be relevant. Now, again, some might support it, some might not. But the point is that it can be done. And for people who miss the boat, even if they have 10 years of preparation for a campaign, they could easily lose.
That's a really crazy way to put it if you think about it. But no, I really appreciate you just like reaching out. This was so fun chatting. You're like one of the smartest people I know. And so thanks for saying, hey, like, let's have a quick chat. I was pretty honored to get a note from you.
No, well, thanks. And likewise, this has been really cool.